Hello, everyone. Welcome to Storytime. Why do we tell stories? My name is Charles Theodore Monk, and I am a Tutlo tutor. I have been a Tutlo tutor since 2018. If everybody can hear me, please say hello or say what's up in the chat, just so I can know that you guys can hear me, and then we can move on with this topic. So, I already see a bunch of people putting some stuff into the chat. That's awesome. Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? It's awesome to be here. I'm so excited to be able to do this with all of you guys. All right. Hello. Hello. Awesome. It looks like everyone so far can hear me. At least a majority of you. If some of you guys haven't said anything, please go ahead and do that. And we can hop right into this presentation. Hello. Hey, Cyril. How are you doing? Nice to see you again. Awesome. That's awesome to see you guys. It's awesome that we can do this presentation together. So in this presentation, we will discuss some stories, right? We will talk about different kinds of stories and really what is the purpose of stories? Like, why do we say these things and why do we remember a bunch of these stories? We will be going on for about a half hour, so we should finish in about 29 minutes. And if you guys have any questions, please save them till the end, and I will do my best to answer any questions you guys have. So let's get started and let's get into this presentation. So we are going to start and talking about the origins of stories, right? We are going to go way, way back to the beginning when stories were a first and very popular thing that would be going and told around a village or around your city. So stories are a people's history. This is how people will learn about their ancestors, my family tree, my grandparents. What are we about? Are we famous? Are we not famous, right? And they would also learn about their country. How did our country become a country? What is our history? What are we involved in? And as well as their people and their culture, right? So stories are a people's history. Without stories, we would not know much about our history, right? You get it? We would not know much about our grandparents or our grandparents' grandparents or even our culture, right? Why we act the way we do. That is all in a people's history. So stories were made and stories were told so that younger generations would learn their culture and their history. And stories were also used to teach lessons, right? They were taught to younger kids in order to teach them honesty, in order to teach them to be truthful and to be kind, right? Stories were made as an emphasis in order for people to raise their kids in a right way, right? There would be certain children's stories that would be told where a lesson would be at the end, and the kids would learn, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense, and it molds them and shapes them into the people who they become. And stories was also a way to pass on wisdom, right? Like we were talking about with the people's history, right? Grandparents would learn lessons based on their life. Maybe they made a bad decision or they made a good one, and they would pass it on to the younger generations. So the younger generations can build off what the older generations have done, right? These were lessons that were learned that are passed on as wisdom to younger people. So what is your favorite story? Please put that in the chat. It will help us get to know each other a little better. It could be a superhero story or a story that your mom told you when you were little. A couple of my personal stories. I am a big fan of superheroes, so I love the Marvel and DC stories, with Batman, Superman. And I'm also a big, big fan of, I love like fairy tales in a way, like mystical stuff that involve, magic, elves, dwarves, and all that. So those are a couple of my favorite stories. If you guys have any stories, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. How to Train Your Dragon 1, 2, and 3. Yes, those were amazing. Those are very good. Robin Hood, that is a very, very popular story, right? It teaches you about, giving to other people. Like life is not just about us, it's about other people, right? How to Train Your Dragon, it shows about friendship. Exactly. These are awesome, guys. Is there anything else? Go ahead. Game of Thrones. Okay, that one's a very good one as well. That's a good story, sure. Anything else? All right, awesome, guys. Thanks for getting involved. I really appreciate that. It helps us to have a lot more fun together. All right, so now we will talk about the oldest surviving story that was ever written down, as far as we know nowadays, and it is the Epic of Gilgamesh. So this, as you can see, there's a picture of one of the tablets of this story. The story was dated back to 2100 BC. So that is over 4,000 years ago. And this story still survived. Like when it was first, it was told, from a person to person. And then eventually it was done when people would write down their stories, right? So this is the oldest surviving story ever written down. So this was actually found in what is called Mesopotamia, which is an area around Asia and the Middle East. And it lists a bunch of poem stories, right? So the way that these stories were wrote, it was more of a poem, and it was teaching a lesson based on this king, and he was making a bunch of wrong decisions. So they were using this story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, as we call it today, to pass down these lessons and to pass down some wisdom to the next generations, right? So eventually they found 5 different stories related to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it actually contains a lot of history. So it can be verified by a lot of different sources, such as the Bible and some older documents that were found. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains a lot of multiple stories, considering some ancient historical kings, or even in the Bible, there is a story about a flood. That is all written down in the Epic of Gilgamesh in a different way. So as you can see, all these different stories kind of have the same context when it comes to teaching us about our history, right? They all have different perspectives based on who wrote them, right? So obviously this is super, super interesting. So I just wanted to throw it out there if you guys wanted to, in your free time, learn some more about this. It's super, super interesting. And I personally love it. I personally love this story. So yeah, let's get straight into this. All right. So now we will move on to the next part of this presentation. I am having some issues. Just give me a second and I will fix. There we go. Awesome. So now we are going to get into the different type of stories that we will discuss today. The first one we will discuss are myths. And the second one, we will go into fables and then some hero and adventure stories. And we will end it off with some fairy tales. So maybe asking, I don't know the difference between all of these. Maybe you've heard these names, but I will be able to help you guys understand all the differences with these 4 main topics and stories. So the first one is some myths. So a myth is a story concerning a people's history with a little bit of a supernatural element to it. So the very, very, very famous myth are the Greek gods. This is a story that has been passed down from generation to generation. And so I will break down how this became a myth. So back before technology and everything was around, what the Greeks saw is something called Mount Olympus. So Mount Olympus is actually the tallest mountain in all of Greece. And naturally, they were wondering, how was this world created, right? Like, how are we here? Who created all these mountains? And what they said is that since Olympus is the tallest mountain, they deduced that the god or the gods lived on top of the mountain in the clouds, which is kind of a little interesting based on, every other topic related to gods and everything. But that is how the Greek gods became a thing. And obviously it has become a world-renowned factor. Today, there are multiple stories. Maybe the Percy Jackson series is something that has been developed into over 20 different books and adapted into movies. You know your history on some Greek gods, some Greek heroes, Hercules, Achilles, certain stuff like that. That has been passed down from generation to generation. And it is now considered a myth because there is no plausible way to confirm or to deny that these things existed, right? There is no way to confirm that centaurs or fauns or the gods even existed at a certain time. Now, what is the purpose of myths? So the purpose of myths was to pass down a people's history, no matter how supernatural or no matter how crazy the stories may seem. A myth passed down history, right? So because of the Greek gods myth, we know a lot about the Greek culture, right? What did they worship? How did they behave? What did they believe in, right? Belief is a super important thing to understand a people and to understand a culture. And thanks to this myth, we can know more about Greece, right? For me personally, I love Greek mythology, right? So Greek myths, I'm a super big fan of that. I read books and I read stories about it. So myths pass down a people's history, but there is always a supernatural or kind of crazy twist onto these stories. So that's how you can guys tell the story is a myth, right? It is a historical story with a little bit of some supernatural elements into it. And the next kind of story we will talk about are some fables, right? So fables are created towards the kids genre, right? Yeah, the lightning thief. Yeah, that's one of Percy Jackson's stories. Yeah, good. So get back on topic here. So fables were created to teach kids a moral lesson. So these were kind of the more creative, I guess, the creative aspects of storytelling. So they were typically using animals in order for the kids to be able to relate to a certain kind of thing and picture it in their heads, right? Because they know what animals look like, so they can use animals in these stories. And it would normally center around only two characters or two groups of people, and that way it's very simplistic, so the kids don't have a hard time understanding like what is this story about and getting all confused. It was very simplistic. There was very limited characters in order for the kids to understand, so there would always be two sides in these stories, right? Like in the picture below, that is a very famous fable with the mouse and the lion. You can search that up in your own time as well. Right, yeah. The Lion and the Mouse. That's a very, very famous fable that is passed down for generations, and it's even talked about today. And the ending for fables, it would always end bad for one of the characters or one of the two groups. There would always be a lesson taught. So a very famous fable that I personally have kind of personal experience with is the story of the tortoise and the hare. So the tortoise and the hare is a story about two animals who do a race, right? And tortoises or turtles are not known for being fast. They are very, very slow animals. And hares are known as rabbits, right? They are considerably a lot faster than a turtle. So what their story is about is that they bet and have this race. So what happens is, hey, Tom and Jerry, yeah, sure, okay, yeah. So the purpose of a fable was to teach the lesson. So the lesson in the story of the tortoise and the hare is that slow and steady wins the race. So what happens is the hare, he gets off to a very, very big lead over the turtle, and he decides to be lazy and to take a nap because he's like, oh, I have this big lead over someone, so I might as well take a little bit of time to myself and relax and kind of just sleep. And then he wakes up. He doesn't realize how long he was asleep, and the turtle is actually about to win the race. So then the hare gets like super worried, so he starts to run as fast as he can, but he is too late, right? So fables teaches us the story of, like in this certain one with the tortoise and the hare, it teaches us not to be lazy people, right? It always teaches us to try our best, which is something a lot of kids will remember when it's passed down from generation to generation, right? It's very simple. The story is around two animals, and one of them wins the race and the other one doesn't, right? Kids love to compete, and kids love to, show who is better between the two. So that's why fables are centered towards the younger people, right? If you find animals and stuff like that, that is centered around a fable. Typically, it's around a fable. And the next kind of story that we will discuss are hero or adventure stories. Now, these are some of my favorite stories. Hero and adventure stories are used to inspire young people or even inspire older people, right? Because in a hero or adventure story, there is always a clear goal to accomplish, whether that is to beat the bad guy or to save the world, right? It will inspire everyone to try their best to become better, right? Like you said, it typically involves a villain. So in most hero adventure stories, you will have a bad guy trying to do something and the hero will try to stop him. So you will have, let's use Marvel or DC with the superheroes, right? A superhero will always have a villain, and what he has to do is stop the villain from hurting people. This is a very important lesson that is passed down to a lot of people in hero and adventure stories, right? It teaches us to fight for what's good and to fight for what we believe in, right? We believe in justice. We believe in people being treated right. So a hero story would inspire young people to treat everyone correct. And before movies were a thing and before books were a thing, hero or adventure stories were typically taught from a older person's perspective. That way, the young people would be inspired to be like someone, right? So typically, maybe you would have a war hero from your city or your tribe. He would go and tell a story to all the younger kids, and the younger kids would all be amazed at the story that he's telling. They would all be like, "Wow, this guy is amazing. He saved us all from dying or from suffering slavery or something like that," and they would be inspired to be like the person telling the story, right? And from nowadays, hero stories are what all young kids love to hear, right? You will always see, especially younger boys, they would love to go around, dress up as superheroes, and to kind of experience what it's like to be a hero per se. So typically, a hero and adventure stories always has a villain against a hero and a clear goal to accomplish, right? Whether that's to save the world or to, stop the bad guy from hurting people. That is what a hero or adventure story was made for. So now, and I guess you could say hero adventure stories resonates a lot with younger boys, right? And especially some girls love hero stories, but now we will switch it over to the young girl's perspective, and young girls love what we call our fairy tales. So what is a fairy tale? So a fairy tale is a story that usually involves a lot of magical aspects, if you can say. So you could say everything seems, there's always magicians. There would be magical creatures, whether you would say your elves, your dwarves, your magicians, your even unicorns, or things like giants, right? Those would all be in what we consider fairy tales. And there was always a sense of unusual happiness or always having happiness, right? If you hear a story where they say, and they live happily ever after, right? Those are in a lot of popular fairy tales nowadays, right? So typically, what would happen in a fairy tale, it would be a man's adventure in a magical land. So we can think of some very, very popular ones like Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Jack and the Beanstalk. All of these have a like a man or a girl going into a magical land, and they would have to obviously have some sort of goal, but there are always some magical aspects into this, and a lot of these have been adapted into Disney movies, right? All your princess movies, you have Frozen, you have Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Cinderella. I could go on and on and on the amount of Disney movies that have a bunch of fairy tales in it, right? So when you think about fairy tales, the difference with fairy tales and the difference with myths, right? They both have magic in them or some supernatural aspect. Fairy tales is unusually happy, and myths are based on history, right? Like I was talking about earlier with the Greek myths, Greek history is passed down in those stories. That's why it's called a myth. While compared to fairy tales, while it may seem similar, if it's not based on a historical figure or something happening in our history, it is not really considered much of a myth. It is considered a fairy tale. So I hope that helped you guys out in understanding some of the bigger genres of stories. There are some typical other stories that are passed around as well, some other genres, but these are the four, I'd say, biggest genres. And now let's get into some idioms that are put into a lot of these different stories, right? So the first one, in the nick of time. What does that mean? So what I will do is I will explain what these idioms mean. So what is the meaning behind these idioms? And then I'll put them in a sentence to help you guys kind of understand it more. So in the nick of time, this is a idiom that means it happens just in time. This is really used a lot in hero or adventure stories, right? You will say, you can say like, the hero saved the world in the nick of time with no time to spare. If you see like a bomb about to explode and then they defuse the bomb with like 1 second left. He does it in the nick of time. Like he diffuses the bomb in the nick of time, just because there's no time to spare. So in the nick of time means at the last possible minute, right? Or the last possible opportunity where something can happen. And the next idiom we will discuss actually comes from a typical Greek myth around the hero or the son of a god named Achilles. His story is that when he was younger, there is a river in Greek mythology that if you go into, you cannot die. There is no way your body can get pierced because of this river's powers. So what Achilles' mother did is he grabbed him by the ankle and dipped him into the river and pulled him back out. So his whole body was covered in this power where he cannot die. But his heel was his weakness. So, because it was not put in the water, right? So that means an Achilles heel is a person's weakness, right? For example, I can say in a sentence, my Achilles heel when I am trying to eat good are chips or are fast food. I love chips and fast food, right? So I would say my Achilles heel is fast food when I'm trying to diet. My weakness is fast food. So the first one was from a superhero or adventure story, right? A hero or adventure story. Number two typically comes from the myth standpoint. It originated because of a myth. And number three, as mad as a hatter. This one is a mix of both hero and adventure stories and fables. So a hatter, yeah, Pieter's right. Like pizza and chips, that is a big weakness when it comes to dieting. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. All right. So number three, as mad as a hatter. It comes from a fable because of the origin coming from typically a rabbit, which is a hatter. Um, and hero or adventure stories, and it comes from Batman's one of his main villains is the Mad Hatter. So, as mad as a hatter comes from a meaning of you being typically kind of crazy or kind of insane. So, as mad as a hatter actually originated from back in the day. People who manufactured hats or made hats were called hatters, right? And what they would do is they would have some sort of serum or some sort of material that they would use on to create their hats. And this product that they would use had a lot of bad chemicals in it, and it would slowly and slowly drive a person kind of insane and drive a person mad. So that's why the term as mad as a hatter became a thing. So that's a little fun fact, right? Because they become crazy because of the serum or because of the product, I should say. So that's why the saying as mad as a hatter became a thing. And it's used a lot in fables and the hero or adventure stories, right? So a sentence you can use is villains in movies are as mad as a hatter. This means villains in movies are crazy. They are kind of insane, right? And number four, this one is a very, very popular one, used in a lot of fairy tales, and it is called star-crossed lovers. What does that mean? It's so popular, and let's break it down, right? So star-crossed lovers are two people who are super, super far away, just like in the universe, right? If you look up and you look at the stars, they may seem close, but in reality, most of them are super far away from each other. That's why star-crossed lovers became a thing. On where two people genuinely really love each other, they're just far away. And eventually, typically, star-crossed lovers do get a happy ending in the end of fairy tales, right? You could say maybe a prince or a princess. And like, let's use Cinderella, right? Cinderella is a maid, and she falls in love with the prince. They are star-crossed lovers because princes don't really marry maids, right? They typically marry princesses. But he marries a maid. So Cinderella and the prince, in this case, are star-crossed lovers. So those are some very popular idioms that you will hear in a lot of stories. Like you will hear like I said, in the nick of time, hero stories, Achilles' heel, based on myths, right? As mad as a hatter comes from a lot of hero stories, and it's also used in some fables. And star-crossed lovers comes from a lot of fairy tales. And now we will discuss some quotes talking about how important stories are to people. So I will read these quotes out loud, and you guys can follow with me. and then I will explain the meaning of these quotes to help people kind of understand, because some of these will be a little difficult. So the first one right here by Philip Pullman. After nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. So what he's saying is, as after we have a house, after we have food and friends, stories are the thing we need the most next, right? We need to be able to tell stories to each other. This was how my day happened, right? I made this mistake, so learn from this. Or you will tell a story from your childhood to your friends, and you guys will become closer together, right? Stories bring people together. They bring a culture together. They bring friends together, right? This is the story of how me and my wife met, right? Those stories are super important, and they bring people together, right? Without stories, there would not be much to talk about with a lot of different people. So that's what he is saying here. Stories bring people together. After we have what we need, stories is what we crave and what we need the most next. And the next quote by the very famous person, Neil Gaiman. I will read these aloud as well. Stories you read when you're the right age never quite leave you. You may forget who wrote them or what the story was called. Sometimes you'll forget precisely what happened, but if a story touches you, it will stay with you, right? This is super, super impactful and super, super important when it comes to, learning your life lessons, right? Like I said earlier, stories are used to teach a history, to pass on lessons, and to teach wisdom to a bunch of younger people. So he's saying here, no matter how old you are, but when you hear or read a story at the right age, you might forget some of the things, but a lesson or a fact will always stick with you if the story relates to you, right? For me, like the whole story of the tortoise and the hare taught me when I was younger to always try my best and to always do my best no matter what I do, right? And that stuck with me. I don't remember all the facts of the story, but I remember the main moral or the main lesson, right? So what Neil Gaiman is saying is that no matter how old you get, when you read a story at the right age, you will always remember the core lessons or the core values that this lesson or that this story teaches you, which is awesome to read. And the next one is by the author J.K. Rowling, who wrote very, very famous books that a lot of people know. And her quote is that there's always room for a story that can transport people to another place, right? So what she is saying is that a story resounds in you and it brings you into the story, right? A good story, you feel like you are part of the story, like the characters, you feel like you know them as friends. The story feels like it happened to you, right? A good story can bring you into the story, right? And it gets you involved in the story and it feels like you're a part of it. So that's what she's saying, right? A good book can transport you to another place. It helps bring you into the story and makes it look real life, right? Jen, imagination. It helps your imagination. Like a good story brings you into the story. And the next quote is, a good story should make you laugh and a moment later break your heart. That means that a good story should connect with the reader emotionally, right? You rejoice when the heroes win, but you get sad when something bad happens to your favorite character, right? Because it gets you attached. It feels like you are in this story. It relates to the quote we just talked about, right? A good story brings you into the story and you rejoice, right? You get happy when the good things happen and you get sad when the things, negative things happen to your favorite characters. And the last quote is a little longer, but I love this quote. It's one of my favorites. It's by John Berger. When we read a story, we inhabit it. The cover of the book are like a roof and four walls. What is to happen next will take place within the four walls of the story. And this is possible because the story's voice makes everything its own. I love this so much because like when you read a story, it feels like you're kind of like in this house, right? And it's only you and the story, and you're kind of just reading the story and you're taking it in, and it's kind of making everything its own, right? Its own house. You feel like, if your heroes or if your favorite character goes on an adventure, you feel like you are going on the adventure, right? It feels like you are enclosed in this beautiful world that you really enjoy, right? Like when you read so what he's saying in this quote is when you read a story genuinely, you really feel like it's just you and the story, right? No one around you, nothing in your surroundings affect you. It's just you and the story, which I love a lot. And that brings us to the question and answer portion. If anybody has any questions, please put it in the chat. I will answer them. If there's not, we will move on to the last couple parts of this lesson. If you guys stick with me for another 2 to 3 minutes, we will be done. And yeah, so if anybody has any questions, put it in the chat and I will answer them if anybody has questions. If not, that's not an issue, and we will move on to the next part of the class or the next part of this presentation. All right, so it's looking like there are no questions for now. If I see a question right after this, I will be sure to answer it. So here, there are some polls I do have to throw up, and I would really appreciate you guys' feedback on this. So I threw up the first poll. Can you guys please put in some feedback on that for me, and I will do my best to answer them. And I would really appreciate all the information that you guys put in there, whether it's useful, not useful, quite useful. Just please put that in. I really appreciate this feedback, guys. It helps me become better, and it helps us understand what you guys love to see, right? So I see that a bunch of you guys put in your answers. That's awesome. That's awesome to see. All right, so I'll give a couple more seconds for people to put it in, and I will move on to the next poll. All right, awesome, guys. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it helps me understand you guys more and how you liked the presentation, right? So I have one more poll that I will throw up for you guys. I appreciate that a lot. And it's just one more little one, and we will be done. It's kind of sad that we do have to end, but this was super fun. Yeah, awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for getting involved. I really genuinely appreciate your involvement. I love doing these presentations, and this helps me to be able to, work on my craft, right? Like I said, these will teach me my personal lessons as well that I will take with me in my future. Awesome. Thank you guys. I'll give about 10 more seconds if anybody has anything left to put into this poll. If not, that's totally cool as well. I appreciate whoever done the feedback. I really appreciate that. All right. So that brings us to the last little section about this presentation. So make sure to follow Tutlo on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. That way you can stay more in touch with the English community and the people who you get involved with. It's kind of like when you surround yourself with people who speak English, it inspires you to be better. So yeah, it just helps us to stay in touch with you guys, and we appreciate anybody who follows us or subscribes to our YouTube channel as well. The YouTube channel has a nice bunch of little hints and help bring us understand, for you guys, for learners, some tips to learn some more English or to remember some more. So it's actually very, very useful. All right, so I do have to say goodbye. That is the end of this presentation. I appreciate all of you guys who got involved. It was very, very fun. Goodbye, everyone, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their day, good rest of the week, and good rest of the year. And I hope to be able to do one of these again with all of you guys, or even do lessons with you guys. Once again, my name is Charles Theodore Monk. I am a Tutlo tutor, and goodbye for now, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.